All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome again if you were on the past session. This is our third session of our virtual winter gathering, our Activity Strong winter gathering, focus all about creating belonging in senior living and how we go from vision to operations. A little bit of background about Activity Strong. This initiative was started by Link Senior in partnership with NAP, NCAP, and Activity Connection. And excuse me, I'm very excited. I'm very excited to be introducing Drew and Stacy more formally in a few minutes. And the idea of the event today was really taking from some of the best ideas out there in order to create belonging and really thinking about how can we make it happen, which is one of the many reasons I'm excited to have both Stacy and Drew talk a little bit about the topic and give us some advice and education. One of the quick highlights I wanted to share is the company that I just mentioned, Link Senior, was a company that I co-founded 17 years ago, which was acquired and merged with LifeLoop during the summer. So as a quick note for all of you, all of the exciting resources about upcoming events and past events that you could find on activitystrong.com will now be redirected for ease of use under lifeloop.com. So hopefully you won't see too many changes in terms of how you can find these, but just know that that will be happening under lifeloop.com. As I mentioned, I was honored to start and lead Link Senior for almost 17 years. My background was, deep love for older adults in my family, and Link Senior was started on the premise of how can we improve the lives of people living in senior living by empowering team members. So I was very fortunate to go through MEPAP 1, which is an activity certification class delivered by NCAP, which I highly recommend. As a quick note, I believe that all people are cool. And if you can see the sticker here, it's just this idea that thinking that everyone is cool, including older adults. And now that we're combined with LifeLoop, I'm so excited to share that LifeLoop is the combination of three companies. It's Never Too Late, LifeLoop, and now Link Senior. And we are now the most comprehensive resident experience for senior living. I'm so excited to share that we now touch the lives of more than 500,000 residents through our partnership of over 4,700 communities. And two things I'm really excited about our work is more than 85% of our clients recommend us, which is truly a testament of the value we provide every single day. And our work remains and stays the most innovative out there. So we discussed a little bit about some of the research we did during the break one, but that gave us, the award that helped us get the award from McKnight, which is one of the most prestigious publications out there. And so we received the Gold Winner Innovator of the Year award. Quick things about LifeLoop is it's all about helping elevate, in a way, true sense of belonging, like we're discussing today, but doing this through building better resident experiences, improving staff experiences, and obviously connecting with family members. All of that is articulated around four pillars: efficiency, engagement, analysis, and connection. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. So before I introduce Stacy and Drew, let me just share a few housekeeping reminders. One is we can earn up to 3 NAB, NCAP, NCTRC, and/or NCCDPC credits. To do that, you need to attend one session or up to three sessions and fill in the survey no later than midnight, Sunday next week, which is December 8th. And again, you can earn up to 3 C credits. Given the high number of attendees, please be mindful that we will be sending these certificates out throughout next week until December 9th. And if you have any questions, as always, please feel free to reach out at webinars with an S, webinars@linksenior.com. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, so if you want to come back to it and watch it, it will be available on our website. And if you want to share it, please be my guest with your friends and other colleagues. We love to share excellent quality education. Obviously, we're using Zoom. And if you want to interact with us, two ways: the chat, which gets really busy, so please make sure you select everyone so that everyone can see your valuable contribution. And then if you want to have a question or start a conversation with our speakers, the Q&A is probably the best place to start that, and we'll be monitoring that. Last but not least, please have fun, and thank you so much for what you do every single day. Now, on to our third session. What is citizenship in memory care? So obviously we're tagging from the first session today, citizenship in senior living, being coined by Jill Vitale Awesome from Christian Living Communities, but with the help of Stacy Flint, who's the Director of Sales and Marketing at Center for Applied Research in Dementia, and Drew Percival, the Regional Director of Operations and Balfour Senior Living. We're going to learn how this happens in memory care. Drew and Stacy, thank you so much for being with us. Drew, I'm happy we were able to correct your lighting and coloring.
Me too. Sorry about the
Yeah.
background.
Oh, no problem. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, let you take it away, and I'll be back almost at the hour unless you want me to come back and help you with Q&A. Thank you.
Hey, well, I am going to share really quick. So please ignore the pictures of my children while I do that. So hello, everyone. My name is Stacy Flint, as Charles so graciously introduced me, as well as Drew. I'd like to welcome you guys today. Gosh, I don't know, Drew, were you on that previous session? It was so inspiring.
I was, yes.
It's got me thinking in a million directions, both previous sessions. So I caught two and then the break. Lots of good information there. But today we're going to be diving into what does it mean really to have a community where we welcome folks who have memory loss as citizens. What does that look like? How do we offer citizenship in this setting? And, I think that where that begins is really with these four basic components. We're going to be talking a little bit about rights, responsibility, inclusion, and belonging. And don't you think, Drew, it really comes down to community, right? These are elements that are in every community, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the industry and in memory care specifically, we are caught in a great big sort of gray space. And just a housekeeping item, I'm an executive director for Balfour Senior Living, which is our standalone memory care community. But as an administrator, we know that resident rights are a very big, important part of our responsibility here. And I have found that there's a big gray space between not violating resident rights. We know when we violate them, but what about how well can we inform residents of their rights and advocate for their rights every day? So I think that's kind of the switch that you find in memory care is that, the nature of memory care is that we have to anticipate each resident's needs. And I think just going along with that, we have to anticipate and advocate for each of their rights as citizens.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because it's really no different, right? For like the rights the fundamental rights that you expect not living in a memory care and the rights that are offered to our residents. I think that the actual rights are no different, but being purposeful about them, which is what I think you're saying. Like within the memory care setting, we walk our day-to-day life and we own these things like, oh, it's my right to make this choice. It's my right to go here. It's my right to do that. But our residents, they're not, walking around in the world and there's all of these rules because it's community-based living, which is challenging. But so it's on us as the staff and the people that design and care these communities and care for these residents that we are very purposeful and that we make sure that the lanes are offered, that these rights and opportunities are available to our residents. But in doing that, what I realized in kind of thinking really diving really deeply into this is that do we, we have resident rights that we live and die by, right? I mean, as a person who used to do admissions, like that's something I went over, weekly. But what I've realized is that we really never touch on those within the communities. And I would ask everybody in the chat right now to just note if they have reviewed resident rights within a community that they work with in the past year. Just yes or no. If you want to add anything else, you can too. So we'll take a look at those, and maybe Drew, you can help me sort of take a look. But from my experience, it was something that we rarely did. And if you think about it, we during COVID, like all of those rights, and for good reasons, but we stomped all over those. I mean, rights to visit people, rights to gather, rights to, be in the presence of others. I mean, and again, for a good reason. My question and my challenge to everybody is, what have you done since then? Have you, because we was so long that we got into this like mindset of, mitigating risk and keeping people apart. And we have a lot of head trash, right, over that. And those behaviors are things that we learned because we were functioning from a place of fear. Have you, as executive directors, the C-suite, I mean, have you guys reviewed those or requested that your team look over those so that we understand what their actual rights are? Because what I fear is that they've been altered forever. And I really think that it's time, now that we are in this post-COVID world, that we right the ship, right? And I would guess that, that's something that, has kind of no one's really recognized. So they do it in resident council. Do you do it as a staff? Right? That's what I'm asking really is do we do this as a staff? And it looks like a lot of times in resident council, they do resident rights in the resident council. So it's important for your staff to know these too, because if you think about it, your staff are the ones that are creating the lanes and the opportunities for residents to experience these rights, not just know them. So it's important to for it to be in our actions as well. So did you have any want to add to any of that?
I was waiting for your next slide. Just as an executive director, I have found that there are these hot button items in resident rights. Of course, I'm in the state of Colorado, so one of the big ones is like a right to be free from restraint. So I would say that's probably the one that we revisit as a staff most frequently. But I think the question that we should ask today is, how can we go from a reactive perspective on resident rights, or just looking farther than the hot button items on resident right lists that each person is given, and take a look at the resident rights from a perspective of how can I help signal the residents that they have this right. For instance, we know that a resident is able to send and receive mail unopened, but is there a mailbox in the community for them to exercise that right? We know that many communities have a church service, but are the residents aware outside of 15 minutes before the church service starts? Is it posted somewhere that if you are Catholic, we have communion on Wednesdays? If you are Baptist, there's a church service in this room on Sundays. Of course, it's very chilly in Colorado here right now, and we know that it is a resident right to have unfettered access to outdoor spaces, courtyard access, and this is such a hot button item between, the extreme heat days that we lock the courtyards and the extreme cold days in the snow, and of course, we don't want them to go out and be harmed by the elements, but do we notify them of the exception to their right that day? Do we post something big and super user-friendly such as this that is explaining and answering the question, here's why I don't have, here's the exception to the right that you have every day?
I think what that does is it normalizes the exceptions. It normalizes the mailbox, right? So it's not only the right, but it's also normalizing this environment what would they be experiencing should they be going to get their mail at home? If they went to go somewhere out in public and they were like, "Oh, it's closed," right? And there's a sign on the door that we would expect to see some sort of a notification.
Of
So
course.
that's an extension of this right, is that sharing of information, right? And the reason we're focusing a lot on rights is because that's really something that ties you to the community. It helps you identify what is accessible to you within the greater community that you live. So in relating this back to you and I, the same way, and normalizing it for our residents. So, it doesn't have to be this delineation between those that live in the memory care environment and those that live, outside of it, if we work to normalize it to where the experience is more neutral and it doesn't have to be. I mean, of course, there are ways that we alter the environment and we support our residents, that make it different, and the fact that they, can't freely come and go, so there are those, but it's on us to really try to normalize that as much as possible, and to, ensure that we're focusing on the things that are more difficult to focus on, like their emotional and their social rights, because that's when the lines get a little wavy, right? When we start talking about the right to have a relationship, you know, we've all had the residents where we, we have the moments where they may, male and female may have moved into the community, they may have spouses outside of the community, but they've developed a relationship within our memory care community. How far do we go with that? They have the right to do that just like everybody else, although it may be naughty, they can do that out in the general public. So, being very purposeful and conscious of their emotional and social rights, what's available to them, and then that finessing that we have to do around those very tender topics. That's something that as staff, when we're talking about resident rights, we have to focus on. Um, I think that, inclusion is another element here that we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into. There's a lot of conversation around things like dignified participation. What is dignified participation? Well, and how does that relate to inclusion? So it goes back to choice, right? So I choose whether something is dignified for me to participate in or not. Is it, let's say babies, like residents in memory cares, it's very common for them to have babies, as, a comfort, as an engagement, opportunity for them. And some people will say, well, that's not very dignified because it's childlike. But if it's appropriate for them and it is dignified for them, then there's a solid argument there that, it isn't, too childlike. So I don't know if you have folks within your community that have babies that they carry around and interact with.
Yeah, and again, there's a key difference between offering the opportunity to be included in the community and recognizing opportunity for residents to be involved in offering that to them. So, everything that we do in a community day to day is an opportunity for like a resident to participate in something. The key to this is really knowing the resident themselves and what previous meaningful roles they had in their adult life. So, for instance, if you think about all the things that we do that are not, from a liability standpoint, providing care, how many moms we have in the communities, and all the things that they could participate in small and big ways to tap into their previous roles and feel included, such as helping pass out snacks to other residents or picking up plates afterwards or cleaning up. Those are things that they found meaning and purpose in their adult life and should be able to continue to contribute to the community in that way. Another example that I thought of recently in the process of recruiting is our previous business executives, residence wise, when we as staff and in leadership positions are of course interviewing new team members, but a huge valuable thing you can do, especially when it comes to life enrichment, because it's such a key piece, is to invite them back for a working interview. And prior to the working interview, you could reach out and offer the opportunity to one of your previous business executives and tell them, hey, here's what's going on. Please let me know what you think. Provide them a little provide the resident a little cue card. This is what I would like you to, notice. Can you help make this person feel welcome in our community? And tell me what you think if they should be a part of our team. So simple and small ways, but you can't unlock any of that if you don't have a great life history on each of your residents. Because again, in memory care, we have to anticipate their needs and we have to advocate for ways to be involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that example is perfect because, I mean, if you kind of look here, dignified participation, absolutely. So you're talking about a resident who had been a past executive, who had been a leader in their industry, who had interviewed and been involved in all of these kinds of decision making. It's a muscle memory in many ways, right? That they can pack back into that role. So it's dignified. It's meaningful to them. It's something they have a history of doing. It's something they're likely confident in. And what we know is when you build that confidence, it opens them up to other experiences, right? There's a trust that's inherent in there. And within all of this is this inclusion, right? Because by offering that opportunity to this resident to help interview a staff, to give their opinion on it, that is them contributing to their community, right? In ways that maybe not everybody thinks, because unfortunately, it happens kind of naturally. A lot of times we just don't think about that. We think, oh, this is the staff task. This is a resident task. But when we go back to that whole idea of community and citizenship within community, there are roles that are offered to people. And sometimes they're not the obvious roles, but there's also assumptions that are made about people. We make the assumptions that, well, I mean, the residents can't do that. I mean, they're in a memory care community, but we have to open up that lens. We have to become more aware of the opportunities that are there. And yeah, you'll get feedback every once in a while. Why is there a resident doing that? Why is there a resident helping paint a room? Or why is there a resident that's interviewing staff? And you'll have to explain that to people, but what a beautiful explanation. I mean,
I think it creates a lot of light bulb moments. A 5-minute explanation for why the person is doing that and why it's meaningful and helps them feel a part of the community is a beautiful light bulb moment that many of us would benefit from. We all come in with our sort of predisposed opinions about what is okay in memory care and what is not okay, but everybody can see purpose.
Yeah, and I
in
think
the process.
a lot of those beliefs are based on what we've experienced, right? I mean, we come to the table with all of our life experiences and what we've seen before. So, I mean, I would challenge everybody on here in small ways to move differently, right? To look at things through this lens, to start bringing in, if you don't already, the residents into the behind the curtain, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that as a leadership, team trying to create this sort of culture, we are always going to be swimming in upstream in some capacity because the secured environment, even in the regulations I was reading, the resident rights state, freedom to leave with the exception of memory care, which gives a blanket excuse for every little thing. And so revisiting, how can we advocate for these people? How can we dissolve this fear-based culture of all the restrictions and advocate for residents is important, and it has to be revisited constantly, not just the hot ticket items of violations of resident rights, locking the brakes under a table when someone's at a dining table. Things like that. It's much bigger than that when you're trying to create a sense of citizenship for each resident in the community.
Yeah. I think, and inclusion kind of goes right along and hand in hand with belonging. But belonging, I think for me is a little bit different. It's more about connections with other people. And, again, going back to really trying to be purposeful about this And you mentioned it earlier, we're going to dive into it more, but knowing your people and fostering those friendships, creating the exposure. So, but with a little bit of homework on the front end, right? Knowing the people well enough, knowing their histories, doing the work to find the common intersecting points, and placing those folks in close proximity to one another, engaging them and seeing what happens, introducing them. A lot of times we'll just say, okay, bring everybody in. We're gonna do an activity. We may already have seen, these fostering friendships going on, and so we're pairing people up. But we can be very purposeful about those actions, especially when someone's new into the community, thinking about those things in advance, trying to ensure that they have a sense of belonging, that they have people, right? It's scary. I mean, we've all started new things, but most of us on here, haven't moved into a memory care community, so we can only imagine the challenges and how frightening that is. So, it's important for us to have an environment that the residents, that we set up to where it's endearing to them as a person.
Mhm.
And, when we start talking about, residents in leadership roles, this kind of goes back to that idea of, looking at things differently, pulling back that curtain. And it doesn't necessarily need to be your life enrichment staff that is leading the charge, that's at the front of the room. If you design your engagement opportunities around the residents and around their cognitive abilities, their strengths, then you inherently create a sense of belonging and inclusion, right? Because your community is built upon the people who live there.
Mhm.
So if we look at the memory care like we look at our neighborhood, people move because they have common interests, they work nearby, those kinds of things. It's an area where their family lives. That's what we're trying to create within the memory care setting.
Yeah, and if you look at, challenges that come up among residents more as a problem in the HOA than a problem with that one resident with behaviors, you can kind of change sort of your perspective on, well, how can I create a community for everyone rather than just stifle the bad behavior? Because of course we know that the bad behavior it comes from a person trying to make sense of the world with the resources that they have. But yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Next slide. Yes.
So, yeah, launching into the knowing the person. And I think that if there's anything that you walk away from today, that this is the time to perk up. These are the things that I think that frankly we can do better at as an industry. Um, I work with a lot of different organizations, and one of the first things, memory care, assisted living, CCRC is the whole gamut. And one of the first things that I will ask them is, so how do you know this person? What are your processes, your systems like? What do you have in place to know who they are, to build this service plan, right? Like everything lives and dies by the service plan. That's what we're evaluated on when the state comes in, all these things. But do we start from a generic place and we just add in a few things, make them slightly different? Or are they truly service plans that reflect the individual, not just their physical needs and their medical needs, but also their social needs, their emotional needs. So I think
Yeah, and I wanted to add that, the life history and social profile is very much a living, breathing document, or should operate as such. It's one thing to know what the family can relay when a person moves in, but as things evolve and change, so should the document and the communication around it. And just as I was preparing for this, just yesterday, I had a gentleman, one of our residents, step into my office, and he saw my papers all over the desk, and he saw that, it looked like an office sort of space. And I knew from his life history that he worked in international logistics. And he had, we had a little bit of small talk, and he said, "Hey, would you mind coordinating a project for me down in South Africa? I really need to get down there." how much does that sort of thing run right now? And I thought, in his state of mind and his reality, I can bring him South Africa. I can't as the administrator. I'm probably not the best person to coordinate that. But if there was, and there will be, a sort of communication board, all the beautiful little pieces of information that we learn about the residents when we're doing care or we're fixing something in the, we're fixing the toilet or what have you, and what gets brought up as an interest with the residents in conversation such as the one I had, there should be a way for interdepartment teams to communicate with Life Enrichment for inspiration for purposeful activity that would create a sense of community. Because I know, based on the conversation I had with him, that he would absolutely assume a leadership role in discussing South Africa and all of the things about it, and give him a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging in the community. And I will say that, he's a very challenging resident when he's not engaged. So just sort of, I think that we oftentimes miss the little nuggets of inspiration and opportunity for residents to contribute to their community just between, the care, the housekeeping, the dining, and the Life Enrichment. So a good communication board so that that information can evolve and change and give inspiration for activities directors as well. As a former activity director myself, sometimes you just you need a little inspiration from someone else.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's just speak to like sort of your typical system for gathering data on the residents, right? So resident moves in the process of them moving in. We have a life history form that typically maybe your marketer will pass on to the family or maybe fill out themselves. Once the resident moves in, we will pass that on maybe to Life Enrichment to complete it. Then that lovely little document either is, input into your LMS system or it's put in a binder up on a shelf. And, we might say, hey, everybody, we have a new move-in initial here that you've read their life history.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I wanted to point out that Jeanette in the chat said I was thinking about doing an ambassador group of residents to welcome new residents and show them around. And it's a perfect opportunity for, that profile of a person you have in your community who wants to, make people feel welcome, and someone who is a people person and potentially has charisma to do something like that. So a large print version shared with them of the social profile that you gather upon admission, and you tell them the plan. This is who we have moving in. Would you mind helping them feel welcome? Perfect opportunity, requires little work from any staff members.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean that again, that goes back to community. Just to speak on that really quick, by including them, by giving them a role, especially something that's a leadership role, that role that's showing them around, that is creating citizenship. That levels the playing field. It normalizes everyone because everyone has a role. Have you ever had a resident say, "Oh gosh, I want to pay you for that," or "I don't have any money, I can't do that." There's this very clear line between staff and residents, but you sort of level that out a little bit when you start um, inviting the work to,
Mhm.
like everybody gets to contribute, everybody gets to be a part of it. And again, there's pride in what you're doing, and there's pride in your in serving other people, and then you feel a part of something. But this whole thing about kind of back to the life history, I've tried it a million different ways. I've tried communication boards. I've tried, it's different for every community, for every organization. I can't say that I have the answers. I know there are programs that batch interests. I would say it's important for you to, first of all, figure out what to do with this data that you collected. How can it serve you? How can it be useful? Um, you know, if you're talking about building a community around the people that live in it, you need to know who lives there. You need to know what their interests are. You need to know what you're building. So when you start looking at building your activities calendar for the month, that's where you start, right? Oftentimes we get this directive of you need to have an exercise, you need to have a this, you could fit those parameters in it, but that's not the only place you start. You start with your actual clientele, right? Because this needs to be meaningful to them. And if you're talking about inclusion and belonging, yet you're creating, activities and engagement that are that don't coincide with that don't fit with that, you're not really getting anywhere. And then you hear things like, well, the residents just don't want to do that. Well, yeah, they're not everything's going to be a hit, but are you doing the right things? And are you basing the way you move on data that you've collected? Because you've got it. You just have to pull it out and use it. And so that's the system that, we've talked about this idea several different times on different webinars through Link Senior over the years. And there's a lot of people out there that have nifty little tricks and ways to organically, you know, pair people together and to use use the power of all of their staff to contribute. Because as you point out, Drew, this is an ever-changing, it's an evolving thing. Our residents are progressing, their abilities are changing. Their interests are probably going to stay the same, but they're going to look different over time. So revisiting it is important. I'll tell you my favorite, most easy way to do it is I make a list of all the residents and I print them on huge paper, and put white space in between, or a sheet for each resident, whatever, put their name on it. And when you have an all staff, have everybody tape them to the tables and say, okay, everybody, before you leave, I want you to just go by and write a few things down that you know about these residents. Because we can send out forms all day long. We can send out doodle polls all day long. We can send out surveys and everything like that. But again, it's data that you've got to collate. And, you may even write a few questions in there if there's specific information that you're trying to find out. But that's your best way, is to employ and engage especially your direct care staff, because they know the most. Sorry, everyone, they know the most. They just do, right? And that includes all you activity folks, but they're out there, they're grinding with these folks every day. They're in very intimate situations. They know details about them. And it's really important for you, like you said, to grab some of those little tidbits and then to put those to use. Those are little tools in your tool belt, because the fact of the matter is that the resident life history is, let's face it, it's a skim, right? It's their child or their sibling, but they don't know everything about us. So the real work begins in knowing the resident after they arrive. And that's typically when we're no longer collecting information. We are on their medical stuff and maybe in their mood and in crossover, but are we really talking about just their general interests and what their life history was that maybe their children don't know? As a management team, maybe not necessarily, but your boots on the ground, they're having those close conversations. So empowering them, to give what they know, so that you can really build those service plans in great detail that are actually person-centered. Because at the end of the day, if you do not know your person, if you do not know your residents, you do not have person-centered care. It's impossible. It can't be person-centered if you don't know them. So using that information and challenging everybody to figure out what that system looks like for you. And I even think that there may be maybe something in activities strong or something like that Charles has as a resource for you. So anyways, one other piece to citizenship are rules, and being a part of making those rules, or being allowed to, make decisions, voting, right? We've all just gone through voting, and do they have that opportunity to contribute and to sway or give their opinion about rules that are made within your community? I know, Drew, that you have had residents sit down collectively within your communities in the past and write their rules.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect opportunity at a resident council to, you provide sort of the updates and the current events in the community, and you ask for feedback. And then when you get feedback that seems to be shared among residents, you could propose, should we add this to our community rules? And, you know, the other thing to keep in mind is that the community rules are for the residents and they should have a great big text and they should be really easy to access and refer to. It's not a sort of 11 by 14 size 8 print thing that just checks the box. If you want to foster a sense of true community, you should be able to read it across the room. And you
And
should be able to revise it as things change.
when my experience in doing this is the rules are always very interesting and they're very relevant to place and time. So for instance, one time I sat down at a resident council with residents and I just opened it up with really not a lot of guidance. Just, okay, well, what are our rules? How would you like your fellow citizens to behave? We have common areas. This is communal living. What and the funny thing is they end up being something like do not enter others' rooms without being invited.
Pants are not optional.
Pants are not optional.
Came up at one point.
Yeah.
Which is, reflective of the community that they're in, as it should be.
Had someone that was visiting the dining room sans pants. So that's a community rule. So they should be revisited, right? And added to your point. You should, you have the resident rights. Almost everybody said yes in resident council. Every month we go over to resident rights. But what about the resident rules? Right? And what's funny is it kind of reminded me of like everything I learned in kindergarten, because they're making rules that we all have. Like, be kind, don't talk down to me, don't use loud voices in common areas, be respectful of one another, right? I mean, these are all of these rules that we learned in kindergarten, in preschool, right? And hopefully before that. And of course there are the ones, the don't come to the dining room without pants on. But in general, it's a beautiful process and it's something that can be referred back to, and it's something that they own. And when you have these kind of quirky little situational ones, it's reflective of the community and the people that live within the community. So I just think the whole process is quite beautiful. But having that opportunity and offering that opportunity to folks within the memory care community really establishes that citizenship. It gives them a voice, right? Because ultimately that's what we all want within the communities that we live in. But this doesn't come without challenges. When we start talking, and this is something we face all the time, this sort of dignity of risk, right? When the residents make the rules, when the residents are contributing, or they're doing things that they used to do, sometimes we go, oh boy, should he be painting the room? Is that wise? What if there's a mess? Or maybe it's something that's a safety hazard for them potentially. We tend to want to sort of make our rules and our standards, based on the lowest common denominator, the what ifs out there, and functioning from a place of fear. But it's really on us as the staff to change that thinking and think, well, the most independence possible, right? The least level of care possible. I mean, that's the goal within senior housing. We want folks to be in the most independent environment possible. So shouldn't we make the environment that they are in independent as well? And
yeah, I was just going to say, there always seems to be this fight where resident rights come in opposition of the regulations. That you'll always hear that. And thinking back through the pandemic, for instance, we have, regulations on one end of the pendulum, and we have resident rights, the right to a visitor, specifically what I'm talking about. So they restricted visitation, and there was a huge learning experience through the industry, I think, when you saw it evolve from absolutely no visitors allowed, only window visits, et cetera, to these, okay, well, this is kind of inhumane, so let's add in essential support persons, to today, which is now a resident right that they may have visitors at any time under any circumstances. And so it's definitely been a learning experience, and we should capitalize on that. I know that some activity directors will probably maybe might pipe in on the chat and say that I would like to do that, but my administrator says we can't because the risk management issue of it. So I pulled the top citations of 2023, and of course, because I'm a facts and figures sort of person, but number one was on med administration and oftentimes the documentation around medication exceptions. Number two was inadequate care planning with regard to residents' individual needs and preferences, specifically those with dementia. Number three was insufficient training requirements met for dementia care. That was a new regulation in Colorado. And then the last one that was in the top five was on inadequate privacy. So if you take all of those citations and you think about the lens that the surveyor was looking through, they all have a common ground, which is failure to advocate for the resident. So you can see that the state is kind of changing their perspective a little bit about resident rights and how are we following the rules, which is of course important, and they do that, but how are we advocating for those most vulnerable? And in my experience, I have found that if a resident has a specific preference that comes in opposition to a regulation, for instance, personal grooming products out and available to them in the bathroom, I have found that you're far more likely to avoid being cited if you have care planned with regard to their need, preference, and ability, than doing the opposite. So taking something away without justifying the need for taking it away. You're far more likely, in my experience, to be cited on restricting and not justifying the restriction than providing an accommodation or an exception with care planning to follow.
That makes complete sense, right? Because well, you're sifting through to try to find the balance of, and that's everything we do, right? Within our communities. It's sort of this, if there's one thing, it's another. Like, you want this and this is our rule, so where's our happy medium?
Right.
And what can we put in place to ensure that the resident preferences are met, but also not get in hot water?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
your long-term care ombudsman is your best friend in all of those cases.
Yes, because there is a reasonable place to fall into. It's just opening up that vision, right? Opening up, seeing what the other opportunities are. And as we move into this conversation that's just, I think, is just really heightened and grown over engagement and the normalization of folks, whether it's memory care or folks with dementia, as we move more into that, and Lori Shara said it earlier, that there needs to be more education, and I think that sharing these kinds of things, that there are these reasonable balances that we can come to, that people are seeing a new vision. And that's hard, right? You've seen something some way for so long, and now all of a sudden this is like a clutch your pearls moment. It's like, oh my gosh, oh, well, residents can't do that. Residents can't do that. Oh, but they can. But they can. And all of those things that live in that fear-based thought process can be negated by just testing the water. And why not? Right? I mean, I don't know. I'm 51, and by the time I'm there, which could be a couple years, it could be 10, could be 20, I don't know, but I'd like it to be better. So I'm really happy to be participating in something like this, so that so that I can feel safe in running a little risk to try something, even when I have dementia and live in a memory care community, without saying, oh no, you might get hurt, or that might be too dangerous for you. I'm kind of a risk taker in life in general. So yeah, if we could all work towards that end, that'd be awesome. You are something earlier about like the challenges, like the cultural challenges within, our communities.
Well, first of all, there's a really memory care challenges in this way will happen for certain in memory care. I wanted to say there's a really lovely book that's called Teaching Empathy and Conflict Resolution to People with Dementia that you can find for those HOA type issues between residents. But I think that sometimes what we find a challenge, specifically cultural challenges, can turn into a really beautiful opportunity for human connection. So I have a resident from India, and trying to learn and understand the person while they're getting acclimated to the community. I know that touching the feet of an elder person is a sign of respect. And in times of resistance to care, we in times of resistance to care, we can tap into what we know about the residents culturally and share it with the staff. It's one of the more fun educations to have. Some sort of education that's specific to the resident and who they are and what can we learn from them to humanize, the community that we live in. So
Yeah, and there are different ways, going back to sort of knowing your residents, and part of it is their culture, right? Are they not native to the United States? Are there other people within your community that share a similar background? Pairing those people up. Drew's heard this story a million times, but I had a resident who was she was German and had been displaced as a young woman from her home in Germany during World War II, and had made it to the US through a lot of trials and tribulations, but had, had a life here, had a family, was married, all of those kinds of things, and then developed dementia and ended up in our community. And as we know, a lot of times when dementia really kicks in, that folks will go back to their native language. And so she was distressed quite a lot and would sort of make her circles around the community and cry and say, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. And so, of course, we make the assumption, and then she's moving between English and German speaking. So we didn't have anybody on staff that spoke German. And we were having a hard time helping the situation to comfort her or to understand where home was. And we realized that within our community, we had a German teacher who had been a German teacher at the local high school for 30 years. And he really didn't communicate too much other than to ask a series of about 15 questions over and over again, in English anyways. So we thought, well, gosh, we'll pair them up. And we paired them up, and he literally starts talking to her in German. And so we were like, oh my gosh, this is the key. So then we ask him, to ask her these questions, and he tells us that that she believes that she's still in Germany, and that she is saying she wants to go home because she has forgotten with her dementia that she is in the US. And so this is what's causing all of her distress, is that she wanted so bad, and she was referring to the US as home. So, while it wasn't a 100% cure, we were able to put some things in place to alleviate some of her distress. We decorated her walker with American flags. We had a little boom box that we would play the American, the national anthem. We would spontaneously sing with her. And of course, we would remind her that she was in the US. We adorned her room with things that were decorated that would be external cues for her, so that she could see comfort in her surroundings, that yes, indeed, you have made it to a safe place. How scary is that? Someone who's gone through that, to think like that they never made it. So we were happy to be able to provide that for her. And yeah, of course, she slipped back into it here and there. But there are risks, and there are challenges to this citizenship when you have a large variety of people. But they're also, to your point, Drew, massive benefits as well.
Mhm.
there's learning opportunities for everyone, for your staff and for your residents as well. And we spoke about perception earlier. Sometimes, the perception can be negative, but with a little bit of explanation and understanding, we can get past that. And again, it's just an opportunity to learn.
Yeah, I think that we have to revisit our perspective on what kind of community that we are creating. Memory care can feel by nature so restrictive. And when you talk about being a citizen of a community, one of the most beautiful things that you see when someone has become a US citizen is that they can now vote and they have all these rights that they didn't have before. So then we take back to we look back at our resident rights, and it's not a question of looking at your state's resident rights by going through the list and saying, okay, I haven't violated that, I haven't violated that, I haven't violated that. It's a question of how can I create a path and advocate for residents to exercise their rights on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's what really starts to create the feeling of a community like that.
Well, and I'd like to end with quoting Lori. I see you're still on here, from the previous session, from session 2. She said the most important thing is to have purpose. Like, sit in that for a second, right? More important than meds. Purpose means more and does more for the person than any medication. So also, there was a call out for more education from Lori as well as Steve. And I would challenge everybody who represents a community here to understand what you have at your fingertips. You have a building that has a presence in your community. You have a space to gather. You have an educated staff who is studied on caring for people with dementia. And if there is a call out for more education, then why aren't we doing more of that? You have the forum, you have everything. You're looking for connecting with people in the community. Heck, you're looking for marketing opportunities. Why are we not doing this? This is a beautiful thing. Kudos to, Life Loop, Link Senior, everybody that was on here, providing this education, but you can do it on the building level and you can collaborate with other professionals. So use your forum, highlight your residents, let them speak. Like, this should be happening everywhere daily. I mean, I can't say it enough. When you have folks who are currently on this journey saying this is what's needed, let's listen, right? And do better and yeah, do something great in 2025 and educate people.
Yeah.
So anyways,
and I'm just reading the chat. Thank you everyone for just sharing the space to kind of reflect on what community means. And thank you for having Stacy and I.
So I'm going to be doing the happy hour with Mr. Brian Rife, and I've got to do a little costume change. So Charles, do you want me to pass this back over to you to segue us into the next?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you both. And I see Sasha joining. Thank you so much, Sasha. Before we get onto the happy hour, I just want to just a couple of thoughts, which is, what you just shared about Lori's previous session, like purpose is medication. And I loved how you both iterated so much the importance of getting to know the person. That's where it starts all. So thank you both for sharing so much of your operational and engagement expertise today. And we'll now be concluding the third session. Thank you again for being with us.